Welcome to Talk the Walk. I'm Sarah Wong. As most of the world has opted to coexist with COVID, foreign businesses in China are finding it increasingly difficult to operate in a nation intent on wiping out the virus. More than half of China's biggest cities remain under some form of lockdown, including the main commercial hub Shanghai, bogging down about 50% of the country's total economic output. The British Chamber of Commerce in China is among the latest international business organizations to voice concerns over the negative impacts of the prolonged dynamic zero COVID policy. Joining us today to discuss the business confidence and decisions of British companies in China is Stephen Lynch. He's the Managing Director of British Chamber of Commerce, China. Stephen, welcome to Talk the Walk.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Now, give us a general snapshot of the operational confidence of British companies in China. What's at stake here for not only the British companies, and foreign firms in general, but also Chinese stakeholders here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in so many ways, what's happened recently feels like regression. We feel like we're moving back to 2 years ago, where we're seeing the personal risk remains slightly low, but the business risk is higher now than ever. And we're seeing the biggest level of lockdowns being implemented in certain cities. We've seen that in Shanghai, in areas like Jilin. And then we're seeing these hyper-localized lockdowns being brought. We're seeing that in where I'm sitting at the moment in Beijing, where we're seeing these hyper-localized lockdowns as well as these citywide lockdowns. So we're seeing a huge disruption to life. But we're also seeing this huge disruption to business. So whether it be around supply chains, whether it be around logistics, we're seeing these huge issues impact business, as well as also kind of a growing concern around foreign talent within China. And again, people have not left for 2.5 years, and this personal and professional reasons to now move out of China, and unfortunately they're not being replaced. So for us, we're also seeing this level around foreign talent move away from China and not being replaced. And so there's multiple areas of issue and concern that businesses are now having. And I think for the last 2 years, China has had a very strong playbook of how they've dealt with COVID. So we've seen rapid lockdowns, quarantines, mass testing. And for the large part, that has been extremely successful. And again, China should be absolutely commended for that incredible response to COVID. And I think many businesses, many people were extremely satisfied for the last 2 years. But now we're seeing an increased level of our members certainly not satisfied with this COVID management. And again, they're moving to a case of seeing it as no longer efficient.
I mean, indeed, you mentioned the loss of talent and the difficulty to retain talent is one of the top concerns among your members of the British Chamber of Commerce. In the report that you guys just released, 69% of the over 200 respondents reported an impact on the ability to attract and retain foreign talent, and 57% expect a further reduction in expatriate and local staff if the COVID restrictions remain in place for the next year. I wanted you to tell us why it is significant. And you mentioned the difficulty to replace those lost talents. Tell us why it is significant from the perspective of Chinese authorities, for example, given you've called on them to expedite procedures for international talent and their families coming to China, when obviously preventing COVID from being imported to China remain one of the top priorities for Chinese policymakers.
Absolutely, and I think that is the issue that the Chinese authorities, that China is grappling with the good of the economy versus the health of the people and COVID prevention. So, of course, from our side, we completely comprehend that. But one of the points is a larger point, which is around people-to-people engagement. So the people-to-people engagement underpins this entire relationship, our entire bilateral relationship, or this multilateral relationship with China. We have a government-to-government relationship, we have a business-to-business relationship, and we have a people-to-people relationship. And again, the people here in China are advocates for China, and they've worked here, they've made a life here, they want to stay. But we're seeing these personal, professional reasons for people to leave, and we're not seeing new people come into the market. So that people-to-people cultural exchange is no longer taking place. We have no new students coming to China. We don't see new young professionals moving to China, and we see a disproportionate amount of people moving out of China. And again, one thing to mention, if we were to have this conversation, 20 or 30 years ago, the young professionals coming to China, or the people starting their career now, they're now the business leaders, they're the ambassadors, they're the diplomats sitting right here in China, and again, advocating and again, having that bilateral relationship. So there is absolutely the immediate of foreign talent leaving China. And one thing I will say is this isn't a tap that we can just suddenly turn back on, and next year we're going to see an influx of engagement with China. If we, which we are heading towards, turning that tap off, this could be a generation of lack of people-to-people cultural engagement, which is in this current geopolitical climate dangerous. So again, there's the immediate of foreign talent, leaving China and not being replaced, but there's the bigger picture of the people-to-people engagement, which is, for me, quite concerning.
What kind of damage are we looking at here to China's promise to open up, continue opening up, if we continue to see this kind of loss of foreign talent and difficulty in retaining foreign talents in China?
So again, I would say, China has not stood still for the last 40 years of opening up and reform. And again, almost every single year we have seen movement, and we have seen a genuine commitment to opening up and reform. Just last week, we met with Minister Wang Wentao for MOFCOM. And he reassured us that, China is committed to opening up and reform, to inviting foreign business, for the good of both economy, for the good of both people, if we're talking from a UK-China perspective. So there is very clear commitment from the Chinese authorities that they are still behind opening up and reform. And again, what we are talking about is this people engagement is really critical for that. Not only to mention that right now, there is huge issues around logistics and around supply chains, and again around revenues. So the concern is, if this lockdown remained in place in Shanghai, a huge proportion of businesses wouldn't even be able to stay open. Their revenues are currently almost close to zero. What could that mean for prolonged periods or sporadic periods of lockdowns? That's really concerning around the immediate, but also the sort of the longer term as well.
I'm glad you brought up the meeting with Minister Wang. In fact, I noticed that the British Chamber of Commerce has raised similar concerns before, since the onset of the pandemic, to be exact. And in fact, in December last year, Vice Premier Hu Chunhua, in response to concerns of the foreign investors, has vowed that China would optimize entry channels, promote the smooth operation of international logistics, and help foreign firms stabilize supply chains. And not to mention, authorities from the Commerce Ministry has repeatedly reassured foreign businesses that their hardships will be attended to. Do you think the Chinese authorities have failed to uphold their promise in a way, or have the measures that they have taken has been largely ineffective?
Well, I'd just take it back to the meeting with MOFCOM and Minister Wang, and I generally will say he was extremely receptive. He wanted to work with the foreign business community to address some of these issues, to which, again, it was very clear from the Chinese authorities that, they will maintain the dynamic zero COVID policy. Now, that is China's approach, and it's been extremely successful, arguably, for the last 2 years. But our recommendations come down to that dynamic. If we can't apply the same methods to previous variants as we can to Omicron, and I think we can take best practice from what's happened in the world for the last 2 years. And again, if we look at the UK or indeed some of our businesses which have dealt with these issues, we know some of the best practices that can work. So we ask around our recommendations for this clarity when we talk about dynamic zero COVID, and can that policy be truly dynamic? So again, one of the commitments that MOFCOM made is to work with the foreign business community, to have this regular dialogue with British chambers, so we can be the voice of British business in China. We can feed back to our members, and we can get our members to feed back directly into the Chinese authorities to address some of the short-term issues, but as well as some of the long-term issues. The one thing I will flag is in our recommendations, for over a year and a half, the UK has not had direct flights to China. we once again call for direct flights to be reapplied. And that would go a long way to resolving some of these issues when I talk about talent and, again, that people-to-people cultural engagement.
On that note, I want to ask you about the existing communication mechanism between your Chamber of Commerce and other countries' Chamber of Commerce with Chinese authorities. I wonder what conversation are you currently having with relevant mainland ministries apart from with Minister Wang the other day? And how do you intend ultimately to deliver these feedback from your community to the Chinese authority? And how do you plan on secure a response?
So we have a very good relationship with the Chinese authorities, and I do not think it's just lip service. I genuinely think they are trying to work with the foreign business community, specifically with chambers of commerce, to be that mechanism of feedback between our businesses and our members and the Chinese authorities. So for a long time, we have a good engagement with different departments. As of last week, we produced or released a COVID impact report, which again gave that granularity to the issues that businesses are facing, whether it be around revenues, whether it be around logistics or foreign talent. We fed that directly into the Chinese authorities. So again, we do have that mechanism, which is working. It is being listened to. But again, it's the Chinese authorities is still grappling with COVID versus the economy. And again, we're not saying remove all restrictions and remove, what's made the COVID policy successful, but we are saying, let's be dynamic with this policy. Let's learn from best practice. And again, let's apply some of these recommendations that can go a long way to relieving some of these issues.
We'll talk more about these concerns and recommendations in your report on the other side of the break. We'll be back in a moment. Stay with us.